Ready for a deep dive into a skill that can seriously change your life. Today we're talking all about communication with insights from the English Globe podcast.
Oh, I love that podcast. They always have such great advice.
They really do. And in this episode, they really get into how communication can impact, well, everything. Your work, relationships, even personal growth.
It's true. They actually shared this study, I think it was from Harvard Business Review, about how important communication skills are for career advancement.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Didn't they find that managers often directly link promotions to communication skills?
Exactly. It's not always enough to just be good at your job. You also need to be able to communicate your ideas effectively and connect with people.
It's so true. And it's not just about speaking either. They also talk about the importance of listening, which, let's be honest, is a skill many of us could improve on.
Oh, absolutely. They share this really interesting story about a CEO who landed a major deal simply because he was a good listener.
Really? What happened?
Well, apparently, this potential client had been burned before by companies that didn't really listen to their needs. But this CEO, he just really took the time to understand the client's concerns, and that made all the difference.
Wow, that's a powerful example of how listening can really pay off.
Right? It's about building trust and rapport.
Absolutely. And the English Globe emphasizes that it's not just what you say, but how you say it. They dive into the often overlooked world of body language.
Oh, yes. They talk about how our body language can actually betray our true feelings, even when we're trying to project something else entirely.
Like when you say you're fine, but your whole body is screaming, I'm not okay.
Exactly. And they highlight how important it is to be mindful of our nonverbal cues, like our posture, eye contact, and facial expressions.
Because those nonverbal signals can really make or break your message.
For sure. And the cool thing is, the English Globe doesn't just talk theory. They give you actionable tools, like literally how to calm those pre-presentation jitters.
Yes. I love that they give practical tips, like they even suggest using flashcards for learning new vocabulary. Remember that?
Yeah, it sounds simple, but it actually works. And they even had that communication expert, Dr. Emily Brown, on the show.
Dr. Brown, she's amazing. She really digs deep into overcoming language barriers and cultural differences in communication.
And she had some really insightful stuff about how to handle those emotional roadblocks that can trip us up in conversations. You know, like when you feel yourself getting defensive or upset.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Those emotional roadblocks can be tough to overcome. But Dr. Brown had some great advice. Didn't she suggest something called emotional labeling, where you actually name the emotion you're feeling at that moment?
Yeah, it sounds kind of strange, but she said that just acknowledging our emotions can help to de-escalate the situation.
Interesting. Like hitting the pause button on your emotions before you say or do something you might regret later.
Exactly. Self-awareness is key.
Absolutely. So the English Globe really kicks things off by emphasizing the power of clear and confident speaking.
Right. They actually gave this example of a manager who was constantly being passed over for promotions, even though he was brilliant.
Yeah, what was the deal with that? I'm forgetting.
Well, they said he knew his stuff, but he just couldn't articulate his ideas clearly. Like he would stumble over his words and avoid eye contact, which made him seem unsure of himself.
It's amazing how those little things can make such a big difference.
And you know, they actually quoted a study that found that people who maintain eye contact are perceived as more trustworthy and competent.
Really? I didn't know there were studies about this.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole field of research on nonverbal communication. It's fascinating.
I bet. So it's not just about what you say, it's about how you carry yourself. Confidence is key.
Absolutely. When you appear confident, people are more likely to listen to you and take you seriously.
It's like they say, confidence is contagious. But speaking of listening, the English Globe stresses it just as much as speaking, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They actually break down active listening in a really insightful way. It's not just about hearing the words, it's about really absorbing the message and showing the other person that you're fully present and engaged.
They suggest using verbal cues like, tell me more, or
Wow.
that's an interesting point, to demonstrate that you're actively listening.
Exactly. And they actually shared a study, I can't remember where it was from, but it found that people who use those types of verbal affirmations are rated as more attentive and empathetic listeners. Isn't that interesting?
It is. And it makes the speaker feel heard and understood, which is so important for building strong connections, both personally and professionally.
Exactly. It's all about making that connection.
Now, Let's talk about body language.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how much we communicate without even saying a word.
The English Globe gave this really good example of a job interview where the candidate seemed perfect on paper, but their body language told a completely different story.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, they said the candidate kept fidgeting and avoiding eye contact, which made the interviewer question their confidence.
Wow. So even though the candidate had the right qualifications, their body language was holding them back.
That's right. It's a good reminder to be mindful of our own body language, especially in situations where we want to make a good impression.
Absolutely. We've got speaking, listening, and body language covered. Now let's dive into those insights from Dr. Emily Brown about overcoming some of those common communication barriers.
This is where it gets really interesting. Let's start with language differences. I know a lot of people struggle with that.
I can imagine, especially in our increasingly globalized world where we're interacting with people from all different linguistic backgrounds.
Exactly. Dr. Brown had this great analogy about building a bridge across a river.
A bridge, what do you mean?
She said that even if you don't speak the same language, you can still find ways to connect and create a shared understanding.
I like that. So it's like finding those common threads that connect us, regardless of language. And she talked about how you can use gestures, pictures, even objects to help get your meaning across.
Right, like even if you don't know the word for something in another language, you can still find a way to communicate it.
That's so true. It's about being resourceful and finding creative solutions.
Exactly. And Dr. Brown also had some great advice for navigating cultural differences, which can be a bit tricky.
Oh, absolutely. What might be considered polite in one culture could be seen as rude in another. It's so easy to accidentally offend someone without even realizing it.
Right. Like, I remember reading somewhere that in some cultures, it's considered rude to make direct eye contact, while in other cultures, it's seen as a sign of respect.
It's a minefield. So how do we navigate these cultural differences effectively?
Well, Dr. Brown really emphasized the importance of doing your research. Like, if you know you're going to be interacting with people from a different culture, take some time to learn about their customs and communication styles.
That makes sense. Don't just assume that everyone communicates the same way you do.
Exactly. And she also talked about the importance of being open-minded and approaching those interactions with a sense of humility.
Humility, that's a good one.
Okay.
So be willing to listen and learn from others. Don't just assume that your way is the right way.
Exactly. Now let's talk about those emotional roadblocks to communication. Those can be really tough.
They can be. Those are the times when we tend to say or do things that we later regret.
It's like our emotions hijack our better judgment.
Exactly. So how do we deal with those emotional roadblocks?
Well, Dr. Brown talked about the importance of self-awareness, like recognizing when you're feeling triggered or defensive in a conversation.
Oh, I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Like when you feel that surge of anger or frustration rising up.
Yeah, exactly. And she said that in those moments, it's really important to take a step back and just acknowledge those emotions. Remember that emotional labeling technique we talked about?
Right, where you actually name the emotion you're feeling. It sounds so simple, but I guess it can be really effective.
She said it's like hitting the pause button on your emotions. So you're not suppressing them, but you're also not letting them control you.
I love that, hitting the pause button. So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the importance of clear speaking, active listening, nonverbal cues, overcoming language and cultural barriers, and even navigating those tricky emotional roadblocks.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. But the English Globe does a great job of breaking it all down into manageable steps.
They do. Remember, they gave those 5 practical tips for improving communication, regardless of your English level.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Those tips were pure gold. Do you remember what they were?
Well, the first one was all about listening.
Of course. It all starts with listening. But they emphasize that it's not just about being quiet. It's an active process.
Right. It's about really focusing on what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
They actually quoted that Greek philosopher Epictetus, who said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak."
I love that quote. It's so true. We should be listening more than we speak.
Absolutely. And the English Globe gave some really practical advice for improving our listening skills. Like, remember they said to put away all distractions, so no more scrolling through your phone while someone's talking to you.
Yeah, put those phones away. They said it's about being present in the moment and giving the speaker your undivided attention.
Exactly. It's about showing respect and making the other person feel heard.
And they said that when we truly listen to someone, we're not just hearing their words. We're picking up on their tone of voice, their body language, even their unspoken emotions.
It's about connecting on a deeper level.
Exactly.
Now, Their second tip was to speak clearly and slowly, which sounds obvious enough. But in our fast-paced world, it's easy to rush through conversations without even realizing it.
Right. It's like we're always in a hurry. But the English Globe reminded us that speaking clearly and slowly is especially important when we're talking to someone who's still learning English.
It gives the other person time to process what you're saying.
Exactly. And they even suggested practicing tongue twisters to improve our pronunciation.
Tongue twisters? Really? Like, she sells seashells by the seashore.
Yeah, exactly. They might sound silly, but they can actually be really helpful for improving our enunciation.
That's funny. I'm gonna have to try that. Okay, what was tip number 3?
Tip number 3 was to use simple words.
Right. Now, this doesn't mean dumbing down our language, but rather just being mindful of our audience.
Exactly. Like if you're talking to a group of experts in your field, then of course you can use technical jargon. But if you're talking to someone who's not familiar with those terms, then it's best to stick to simpler language.
It's all about being clear and concise and avoiding those awkward moments where you have to explain what you mean.
Right, like that example they gave of the doctor who used all this complicated medical terminology with his patient.
And the poor patient was too embarrassed to ask what any of it meant.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that effective communication is about conveying information clearly, not about showing off your vocabulary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what was their fourth tip?
Tip number 4 was to ask questions if you don't understand something.
Ah, yes. Never be afraid to ask questions.
They said it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of intelligence and a desire to learn.
And it shows that you're paying attention.
Exactly. They shared that anecdote about the CEO who made it a point to ask at least one question in every meeting, no matter what.
Oh, I love that. What happened?
Well, they said that this simple practice not only helped the CEO gather more information, but it also made his team feel valued and respected.
Because it showed that he was listening and that he cared about their input.
Exactly. And it created this really positive culture of open communication.
That's awesome. Okay, we're on the last tip. What's number 5?
Tip number 5 is to be aware of your body language.
Ah, yes, body language. We've talked about this before, but it's always good to have a reminder.
Right. They reminded us that our nonverbal cues speak volumes about our true feelings and intentions.
Even if we're not saying a word.
Exactly. They talked about the importance of maintaining an open posture, making eye contact, and using appropriate facial expressions.
It's about aligning our body language with our message.
Exactly. And they cited a study that found that people who use positive body language are perceived as more likable, persuasive, and influential.
It's like they say, communication is not just about the words we use, but about the way we show up in the world. So we've covered a lot of really great stuff about communication, but the English Globe didn't stop there. They actually wrapped up the episode by answering questions from their listeners.
Oh, yeah. They do that sometimes, don't they? It's like a little bonus round of communication advice.
Exactly. And these questions were really good, like real-world communication challenges that we can all relate to.
I bet. What was the first question?
Well, the first question came from a listener named Alex, and Alex was struggling with finding the right words in English. Yeah, like sometimes you know what you want to say, but you just can't seem to get it out.
Oh, I totally get that. It's like your brain freezes up.
Exactly. So what did they suggest?
Well, they said that this is a really common problem, especially for people who are still learning English. And they recommended focusing on building a strong foundation in vocabulary and grammar.
That makes sense. You got to have the building blocks before you can start building those complex sentences.
Right. And they suggested this technique called chunking. Have you heard of that?
Chunking, I think so. Remind me.
It's basically learning common phrases and expressions that you can use in different situations. So instead of trying to memorize individual words, you're memorizing these chunks of language.
Oh, that's a great idea. It's like having a mental toolbox of ready-made phrases.
Exactly.
Okay, what was the next question?
The next question came from Sarah, and she gets really nervous when she has to give presentations in English. You know, like the heart racing, palms sweating, kind of nervous.
Oh, tell me about it. I've been there. Public speaking is terrifying, even in your native language.
Right. So the English Globe gave her some tips for dealing with those presentation jitters, like practicing beforehand, but not just in her head, like actually saying the words out loud.
Oh, yeah. That's key. It's one thing to practice in your head, but when you actually have to say the words out loud, it's a whole different ballgame.
Totally. And they suggested practicing in front of a mirror or even recording yourself so you can get used to hearing your own voice.
It's amazing how awkward it can be to hear your own voice, right?
But the more you do it, the less weird it becomes.
That's true. Okay, what else do they suggest for dealing with stage fright?
Oh, they said deep breathing exercises, like taking slow, deep breaths to calm your nerves.
Oh, yeah. That always helps.
It's amazing how powerful those simple breathing techniques can be.
It really is. They can make a world of difference.
Okay.
Okay, so we had a question about finding the right words, a question about presentation jitters. What was the last one?
Oh, the last question was from David, and he wanted to know how to be more persuasive in his communication.
Ooh, persuasion. That's a good one. I think we could all use a little help in that department.
Right. So the English Globe made a really good point. They said that persuasion is not about tricking people into agreeing with you. It's about building rapport and presenting your ideas in a way that's clear, confident, and compelling.
I like that. It's about bringing people along with you, not bulldozing over them.
Exactly. And they said that active listening is a key part of persuasion. It's not just about getting your point across. It's about really understanding the other person's perspective and tailoring your message accordingly.
Oh, that's so important. It's about finding that common ground.
And they also suggested using storytelling as a way to make your message more persuasive and memorable.
Ooh, storytelling. That's a good one. People love stories.
They do. And stories have a way of connecting with us on an emotional level.
Absolutely. A good story can stay with you long after you've heard it.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of communication.
It really has. The English Globe always has such great advice.
They do.
Yeah.
And you know what I love most about their approach? They make it clear that effective communication is a skill that anyone can learn and improve upon.
Absolutely. It's not about being born a good communicator. It's about being willing to put in the effort to learn and grow.
Exactly. And keep those conversations flowing.
Until next time.
Happy communicating.